Welcome to the webinar, How to Boost Case Acceptance. The lecture is being presented by Dr. Brian Laskin, and we're going to begin shortly. And now it is my honor to introduce Dr. Brian Laskin. He is a Minnesota dentist and tech entrepreneur on a mission to connect dentistry by breaking down the silos that exist between dentists and their patients, their teams, and their data. CEO and co-founder of Tooth Apps, as well as creator of the Lake Minnetonka Dental, Upgrade Dental, Digital Nitrous, Opera DDS, and Dental Standards Institute. Dr. Laskin is an advisor to many progressive healthcare companies. He is the author of the Amazon best-selling books, The Patient First Manifesto and Dental Disorder, and the host of the Patient First podcast. And now it is my pleasure to say, take it away, Dr. Laskin.
Thank you very much, Jessica, and thank you all for joining today. It's a tradition that we have at Tooth Apps to begin in gratitude. So I just want to mirror Jessica's sentiment and how grateful I am that you're all here, taking time on a Friday to improve your practices, improve case acceptance specifically today. And I just know, and when we talk about case acceptance, we're really talking about elevating patients' oral health. And so what we're learning today hopefully will have a rippling effect to touch a lot of people in your practices through you, and I very much appreciate that. And I also have to mention that I very much appreciate NDX Laboratory, and Jessica, I mean, is just the most committed person that I know to continuing education in dentistry, and so very grateful to be working with NDX Laboratories too. Little disclosure slide. I won't go over this because Jessica pretty much already did, but I am part of quite a few technology companies in dentistry. And this is my primary practice where I spent the balance of my career for 25 years, grew my practices. We never had less than 25% year over year growth over 20 years. So it grew to 5 general practices, 5 general dentists, an orthodontist, an oral surgeon, 2 locations. And I sold my practice about 5 years ago, but we grew it basically by leveraging technology and teamwork. Which we'll be talking a little bit about today, both of those, and how you can boost your case acceptance with that. But like I said, you know, I sold my practices about 5 years ago to at the time, the 4th largest DSO. In another example of this slide, I actually have a dumpster fire pop up, because what happened once I vacated this building, you know, when we started, the practice was just on the top level, but when I left it, we were going to take over the entire building. And so left the technology companies from the building, bought the condo where I'm in right now, about 6 blocks down the road. And when I left the building, the thing just went very much south because we deviated from the things that we're going to be talking about today. And so I can tell you, not only do these work, but if you put them in place, they're so powerful that when you pull them out, it actually has a negative effect. And then really just going back to these principles is what's turning my practice around now. So this is how to boost case acceptance. You know, like Jessica said, if you have any questions, put them in chat, and I will leave time for Q&A at the end. Our learning objectives today are to, you know, you should be able to equip each of your team members with the tools to communicate treatment, value, effectively, and consistency. This, as you'll hear, a lot of case acceptance is communication. Establish a seamless follow-up process to help ensure patients feel supported, and align your team to increase case acceptance. As Jessica mentioned too, my primary company is called Tooth Apps, and we call it connected dentistry. And why that's important is that I believe we're entering a new phase of dentistry. When I got out of dental school 26 years ago now, we were just on the precipice of switching from analog to digital. I call that the transition from dentistry 1.0 to dentistry 2.0. And right now, there's several themes going on that I call connected dentistry. Connecting more with medical providers, connecting more directly with patients, connecting practices through the growth of DSOs, connecting our systems. But you know, as you're going to other continuing education courses and thinking about things, where I really think we will be able to grow as an industry, as a practice, really with your patients, is by connecting more with our teams, with other practices, with medicine. So just look at that as a general theme. Now, I showed you my office the way it looks today. However, my first office, I don't even have a picture of. So this is an old picture I had to pull off of Google of where my practice used to be, which is an 800 square foot location at the other end of Smoky's Superette, where they didn't just sell tobacco smoke. It was a sketchy place at best, but it was 800 square feet where I got started. Basically had 2 operatories and a hygiene room. Then we were bursting at the seams, so we moved into a medical building that was just down the road. I bought another practice. Went from 2.5 operatories to 4 with another dentist who was just a wizard of a dentist. Beautiful clinic. He started the cosmetic, the AACD division in Minneapolis, where I'm located, and I bought his practice, and he was a great clinical mentor. However, about 2 months after buying his practice, I from this craftsman, right? He was transferring his clinical knowledge to me, which because I thought that was going to be the key to my success, was being the best clinically I could be. However, and you may have had a moment like this if you own your practice. I had a day about 2 months after I bought his practice where it was going to be very difficult. I was very worried about making payroll. Just by the skin of my teeth, we made it, but we were fairly busy. But I wasn't, and I was so focused on the clinical dentistry that we were barely making ends meet. And then that was a big wake up call for me. And since then, I've been focused quite a bit more on the business of dentistry. And a lot of that comes down to what we're going to be talking about today with case acceptance, because oftentimes, and I know this, is when you're in your practice every day, seeing patients, when, we have wage inflation going like crazy, inflation going like crazy, we have, and we have a cap on what we can actually get paid sometimes if you do take insurance reimbursement. It can really feel like you're pushing a boulder uphill, right? And I want to help relieve that today a bit by talking about how we can increase our case acceptance, and not just for small cases, but for large cases too. So we're going to be going through 5 keys to great case acceptance to easily increase your acceptance, profitability, and grow your practice. And importantly, this is without dragging your team along for the ride. They're a big part of the engine. When I first would do a version of this lecture, it was called "My Team Are Trying to Kill Me," because in my practice, my team drove case acceptance the vast majority of the time. And we'll talk about not only how to do that, set that up, but how to incentivize people the right way such that this is that they're supportive. Dentistry is a team sport. And anybody that would join my practice as a team member, we would tell them, we are a high performance team, right? We're playing at a professional level. And if you don't play at a professional level, that's great. You can go to another practice that doesn't, because we very much are looking for a high performance team to work with versus like a family, right? Families are typically dysfunctional. High performance teams are not. If it is a dysfunctional team member, they get replaced. And so that's the perspective that we're coming from, is if you have the right people in place, putting these systems in place should produce much higher case acceptance. Now, don't worry about taking notes. We have a full download of the slides, and there's some activities that I'll show you to do with your teams throughout. So don't worry about taking screenshots or anything. We'll give you the slides at the end. And there are, like I said, there's some fun ones to do activities with your team, or you can develop your own version of it. Also, I want to talk a little about who this lecture is for. It's really for people that are looking to grow. And I don't say that lightly, because there are a lot of team members, there's a lot of practices that aren't looking for growth. They're really looking just to have incremental, year over year, moderate improvement without actually truly boosting your case acceptance. And so, it's really not for people who are looking to have their ego stroked. You know, if you're a dentist that goes, I'm the only person that can do everything. Dentistry is not a team sport. I carry this practice on my back, right? I'm going to challenge your thinking today, right? And I know that change can be hard, but the pain of not changing many times can be a lot worse. And so I would urge you to keep an open mind. The concepts, obviously I'll answer questions that at the end, but I am coming from the perspective is that dentists are not the only people that have good brains and good eyes and are in the dental practice, that dentistry is a team sport. So our first key out of 5 for key case acceptance is communication, both with your team and with your patients. And so we'll be talking about what that is. Number 1, let's break down the elements that go into communication in the patient journey in your dental practice. Now, I'm not at this moment in time, I'm not talking about when they call your practice, they email you, they securely message you. This is when you have a patient enter your office for care. So before they enter the room, you know, obviously they're welcomed, hopefully, by somebody at the front desk. And the people in our business offices that are front desk are absolutely overwhelmed in dentistry today. So I would, number 1, just recommend making sure that you have the capacity at the front desk for for patients walking in the front door to be greeted. And that's very difficult today. So automating whatever you can, you know, when it comes to digital payments, online forms, you know, paperless forms, having people check in before their appointment through a mobile application. The things that you can do to offload your front desk is key. Secure communication so that they don't have to be on phone calls because they last a lot longer, right? So that because, in my opinion, what the people that work in our practice are best at are talking to other people, specifically people in your practice. So having the capacity at the front desk for people to have strong human to human connection. I believe, even though I'm big into technology, I think that having personal connections in the dental practice is key to the patient experience. So number 2 is handoffs. When you have one team member hand off to another, we're not going to go too deep into this, but having one team member, whenever a team member is handing off that patient to another patient, to another provider, introducing them, saying that they're the greatest, third-party endorsement, and just basically, and then telling that other team member, even if they know, because you communicate asynchronously, as we'll talk about a little bit, then the patient knows that you're actually doing the handoff. The handoff, in my opinion, is as much for the patient as it is for the other provider. If an assistant is bringing somebody back to a hygienist, talking about it, and the hygienist says, you know, the patient says to the assistant something like, well, my tooth on the lower left is sensitive. Even if you securely message that to the hygienist while the assistant is bringing that hygienist back, saying that to the hygienist so that the patient knows that you are communicating and are acting as one team is crucial. That's what's called the verbal debriefing. So having a checklist of what the team member goes through when they're doing a handoff is important. If, let's say, it's a hygienist that is then looking for an exam, that information should be passed along to the dentist ahead of time, as we'll talk about in a little bit. But when the dentist comes in, the hygienist still, when cued, the cue that I would have is how's everything looking to you, the hygienist's name, and then the hygienist goes through a list of things that we have gone through, which is more for the patient's benefit than my own. Okay, because obviously, if the patient just got divorced, they probably don't want to discuss that. That should be sent to me privately, as we'll talk about in a little bit. But if there's a broken tooth on the upper left and the hygienist doesn't say anything, the patient is thinking, why didn't they mention my broken tooth? Right. So having that verbal debriefing where you talk about the medical history, perio changes, restorative changes, and then, you know, then basically what the hygienist sees if there's anything that needs to be discussed in front of the patient. Then I would, once you do an exam, and if you validate what the hygienist is saying, and we'll talk about a little bit how to set this up, and really asking the patient if they would like to add any additional information that the hygienist didn't add. Then you can basically discuss that, and then wrap up by repeating that to the patient. So if simple checklist to go through, but I would highly recommend it because it helps engender patience, and they know that your team is working as a team. I believe that team coordination is absolutely key to case acceptance, because when you and your team are on the same page, it instills confidence in your patients, and frankly, it makes everybody's life easier. So we'll talk about elements of these a little bit throughout the presentation, but I also want to talk about when you're talking to patients during an exam, or when patients are talking to you. Oftentimes they don't actually say what they're meaning, and so it can feel a lot like this, right? When a patient comes in and says, a new patient says, "I'm scared of dentists," right? They I felt like Batman here before. I'm sure many have. There used to be an old on Dental Town. There was a thread that had like over 2,000 posts. That the thread was "Patients I want to slap in the face," and it's similar to this, right? So, what I would urge you to do when a patient says a comment like "I'm scared of dentists," they're not actually probably. I mean, they might be scared of dentists, but that's not really what they're saying to you, right? And so there are what I call trigger phrases that I'm going to go through a few of these. And this is also a good exercise to do with your team, to think of trigger phrases that patients might say. But here's a few to get you started. Number one, when people say "I hate you" or "I hate the dentist," what are they really saying? They're really saying they're scared, or more than likely, they're saying, "I don't like the feel of loss of control. I feel vulnerable when I'm in a dental practice." It's very different than saying "I hate the dentist." But people don't want to, adults typically don't say things like "I feel vulnerable." So rather than reacting to this, like, well, I hate patients too, or what do you do for work? Well, I hate accountants too. I mean, that doesn't really truly address the patient's feeling of vulnerability. And so when patients would say things like to me, "I hate coming to the dentist," you can say things like, "I totally understand why you would hate going to the dentist. And I'm going to do my very best to that you have the best experience. And if you ever feel like you need a break or anything, you're in total control. Just raise your hand," right? So letting people know that they are in control alleviates that unspoken need that they're communicating. Here's another one. Flip side of "I hate the dentist." "My last dentist was the greatest." It sounds really good when you have a new patient come in and say this. However, if you really think what they're saying that they don't trust you yet. They're saying, "My last dentist was great, and I'm nervous because I don't know about you so much," right? So if you're looking at the patient's radiographs and you see work that was done that's nice, complimenting that prior dentist, talking about how good they could be, or say, "I'm very glad you had great care. We're going to do our best to provide as good or possibly even a better experience." Just letting patients know that you understand what they're not saying, which is that when they're saying that they really like the dentist that they're coming from, that they don't quite trust you yet. So it's up to you to engender that trust. The flip side of that one: "My last dentist was a jerk. Oh my gosh. I hated her or him. Wow, I just had a horrible experience." Translation: I would make sure to go over financials and have good financial arrangements. The number one reason why patients don't like a dentist typically comes down to something at the front desk, and oftentimes it comes down to a lack of financial arrangements. So they didn't actually think the dentist was a jerk. They had a bad experience with the prior office. Most of the time, it's because of finances. How about this one? "Oh, I just had a crown and I went back 12 times to get this thing adjusted," right? And usually in my experience, that means that the patient process. The dentist didn't have the patient bite down hard enough for long enough and grind around, because obviously, if we're dealing with second molars, you can actually flex your jaw the harder you bite. That can then cause more compressive pressure. And if that prior dentist wasn't having them grind like they do at night, which can be very aggressive, you're not going to see it. I can't tell you the number of patients that came in saying how many times they've had to have crown adjusted, and then all it took was having them bite and grind as hard as they possibly can. Now, not a fun thing to do, but it's less fun to come back 12 times to have a crown adjusted. So those are just examples, and again, I'll give you these slides, and you can, it's a fun exercise to have with your team to say, what are the other testing phrases that our patients have, and then try to come up with the translation. What is the patient really getting at? And when we're making these communications with patients, when patients say, they hate us, or my last dentist was a jerk, or whatever, right? It can feel very isolating. And so, one of the reasons why it's so popular having online forums with dentists is that dentistry can be a isolating profession, right? And so working as a team helps break that down. Another example of that is, team members who would have to track down the dentist. So, if you talk to one of the biggest frustrations that hygienists have, it is trying to find the dentist when, he or she is out having coffee and they have an exam for you to do, right? Yelling down the hall, or, having Post-it notes and things that don't work very well. So what I would recommend instead is having a digital lasso, having secure communication, where you can use, you don't need to, but you can use a Apple Watch or an Android watch, or your phone, or a desktop or a tablet, where you can securely, and keyword here is securely, being HIPAA compliant, message about patients directly. And there's quite a few different technologies that do this. But if you haven't leveraged it, the results should blow your mind. It really, in my office, it led to over a 33% increase in production once we leveraged security communication to drive service done that day. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But when a patient comes in with a broken tooth, if you ask them if they could get that, if they wanted to get that done today, most of the time patients say yes, because they have anxiety. That anxiety builds with time. And so if they find out that they need to have a crown, let's say, for example, if you can do it that day, that alleviates that buildup of anxiety over time. So instinctively, people want to have work done most of the time if you can get it done that day. And so having secure communication where you can message and have somebody take care of that, like set up a room, is key to that. So leveraging secure communication is key. Key number 2 is clones. So what I mean by clones is having your team view clinical dentistry similar to you. It sounds a lot harder to do than it is. And I'll go through how to do this. We use a process called calibration. So if you look at this secure message that's sent, it has a checklist of everything that was discussed, that's pertinent. And so this is what gets sent, not set in front of the patient, but gets sent to me before I walk in the room. And you'll see right here, there's this number, calibration. What calibration means, you can pick any type of clinical procedure you want to, and then calibrate on it. For example, you could start, I would recommend, with indirect restorations. So what that means, if there's a patient in the hygiene chair, or if the assistant is doing a new patient exam, or for example, just having the team member put the number of indirect restorations they would have if that patient's mouth were their own, or their mother's, or somebody they really like. So you don't have to be more specific than that to begin with. Just say, put down the number of indirect restorations, inlays, onlays, partial crowns, veneers, crowns, bridges, how many units of indirect restorations you would have if that patient's mouth were your own. Then after the exam, you write your own number. If I come up with 4, the hygienist comes up with 4, there's no discussion to be had. If the hygienist is 4 and I say 1, then we discuss the differences. What are you seeing that I'm not, or I'm not, seeing that you're not seeing? And if, so whenever there's a discrepancy, you just discuss what you're saying. And then if you calibrate with a team member, it should take less than 2 weeks for them to understand the way you look at clinical dentistry, per item. Indirect restorations, and then you can do it with caries, you can do it with orthodontics, implants, go through the list of procedures that you do in your practice. And over time, that team member will be trained to see things the way you see them. The goal here isn't necessarily for you to understand the way the hygienist or the assistant, because obviously the dentist is the one who's prescribing treatment. The goal here is that the hygienist can authentically say, I know what Dr. Laskin will likely say, that this tooth needs to have, whatever that treatment is, because you've calibrated. And so to help get you started, I have some cases for you to calibrate with your team on if you don't want to do this with a live patient first. So here's example number 1. So you can see here a tooth that has a lot going on. So you could just calibrate with the number of indirect restorations you would do. You could also calibrate on, a lot of different things here, right? Crown lengthening, or, extraction, or endo, or, there's obviously a lot going on here. Now, I'm not saying that this patient needs to have teeth extracted or endo done. I'm just saying that there's different things that you can calibrate on using these patients, these examples. Certainly indirect restorations for this patient would be good. You could also say direct composites if you're not going to do indirect on some of these. Would you replace the amalgams? These are the kind of things that you can calibrate with team members on. Here's case number 2. Similar, however, obviously you can see there's a little anterior. Not, these were real cases. Obviously, you can tell by the fogging of the mirror. But what would you do in this instance? Frankly, I don't know. But it opens up the discussion with your team members, so they can begin to see things through your eyes. Case number 3. Obviously there's some caries here that you can calibrate with your team on. But again, the goal here isn't just to use these cases. It's for you to do this with a steady stream of patients. We do it for a specific amount of time, 1 to 2 weeks, and we do it for every single patient every time for that 1 to 2 weeks. Here's case number 4. So again, some more caries. Just and again, I'll give you these slides that you can play around with your team if you want to at your next team meeting. Key to case acceptance number 3 is intraoral cameras. Intraoral cameras, I think, are one of the best things. I mean, it's not a controversial statement to say that, when patients can see what you see, it boosts case acceptance, but I'm gonna give you some tips on intraoral cameras. Because a picture truly is worth 1,000 words. Also, 1,000 words gets patients to glare over. So if we can show them versus telling them, it goes a long way. People have selective hearing. They don't have selective seeing. So what that means is before you describe what's going on, throwing this picture up on the screen makes the most sense. Also, what doubles the ineffectiveness of speaking is when both you and the hygienist have said the same thing. So this is a very difficult thing for most dentists, including myself, to do. But when you see an issue that the hygienist has already discussed, not discussing it with the patient is key. Because if you're both saying the same things, you're really just repeating it and they're probably not listening. So either having you describe everything, which it would not be what I recommend, or calibrating with your team members so they can describe it to the patient, and then you just asking if you have any questions when you are in agreement with the hygienist. That's key. I should also mention, when you disagree with the team member, always backing them up by saying you have a fantastic hygienist or assistant, even if you disagree with them, then say, I can see what whoever's thinking, however, I view it this way. And then when the patient's gone, having a conversation privately with that team member. Nothing kills team members wanting to help preempt treatment for you or discuss with the patient because they probably have more time than you. Nothing crushes that more than discounting what that team member says in front of a patient. So make sure to back them up even when you think that you would do things differently. So some keys to actually taking good intraoral photos. Just having a picture of a silver tooth doesn't really do the trick. If you have a salivary bubble here, if you have a saliva bubble or poor angulation, this is just confusing to patients. So keeping in mind, taking a single tooth versus pulling back and seeing the quadrant might actually be more effective. So I would say that when you have a single tooth issue, focusing on the single tooth with a good picture, without saliva bubbles, with good angulations, so the patient can see what's actually going on, makes a lot of sense. Less is more. Focusing only on the one issue, as we'll talk about in a little bit, makes sense. Sometimes when you pull back, right, it can be confusing to patients. Their eye might go directly to this discolored tooth, and they may not even notice what's going on right here until you point it out. So if I were to take this image, I would not include the premolars and the canine, because just focusing on these two teeth eliminates that shade discrepancy here and helps the patient focus on what you want them to talk about. So with a couple of what I would say bad examples of pictures, here's what I would say is a good one, right? Nobody looking at this tooth is going to not know what's going on, right? It looks like this tooth is fracturing all around. It's leaking. There's obviously something going on over here. But if my purpose is to communicate about this tooth right here, I would say this is an effective photo. So just, again, by way of examples. Also, key to having these photos is giving them to patients when they go home. Many times, particularly if there's bigger treatment plan, patients want to discuss this with their spouse. They might want to look at it at home, and so giving them the ability to have this, either through a secure mobile application or however you want to give it to patients. This is an example of the ToothApp's patient application. It's soon to be called Care, where patients can actually look at their records directly in their pocket. Makes a ton of sense. And then you can send reminders to follow up on the treatment. Because what really happens is when patients are in our practices, we're showing them intraoral photos, we're talking to them. It's like being at the campfire when it's snowing outside. It's not. I live in Minnesota, but it doesn't look like this anymore. As soon as people leave your practice, it gets cold. Every step outside your practice gets cooler and cooler, right? So giving them the information in their pocket, it's kind of like transplanting what you see in your brain into the patient's pocket, and they can then look at it at home. They can review this information, and it's going to be much easier for them to accept cases, particularly the larger ones. If you're doing a quadrant orthodontics, if they can review this at home with their spouse, with their family members, they can look at the treatment plan and make good decisions. It's much easier for them. I like to think that every time they step outside your front door, a little bit of information is falling out of their brain, right? And if you can keep it in their pocket, it helps a lot. So number 4, cash bonus systems, I think, are a big incentive for a lot of team members. And I'll show you what I mean by incentives. Many times people think of like monthly, quarterly, annual bonuses for treatment plan acceptance, particularly for things like same-day dentistry or things that like smaller cases. Doing very small bonuses can actually go a long way. Going back to our secure communication, when we talk about these bonuses throughout the day, it actually amps up the energy in the office. You can say, if we just do, X amount more, pizza tomorrow. And, I know that oftentimes people have an aversion to talking about bonuses or dollar amounts in practices. However, the reality is that that's how we quantify the care that we deliver. If we don't do anything, we're not elevating anybody's oral health. So obviously we want to be aligned in, and calibrated so that we all are only doing things that we would want to do do on ourselves or on our spouse or on a loved one. But getting to the point where everybody is doing their best to get case acceptance is a huge part of the puzzle. And I would recommend not doing monthly or quarterly bonuses or even daily bonuses, but instantaneous bonuses. Because oftentimes it just takes $5. Somebody treatment plans, you get $5. Somebody assists for this, you get $5. What that means is that we're all rowing in the same direction. If you have to work through lunch, guess what? I'm giving you something a little special for. So if you're doing the extra effort, you get a little bit of extra payment, and over time, it tends to be, or if you incentivize people correctly, it tends to be car payment money, right? So it can build up, but then also your production. Again, in my office, it was over 33% increase in production. So we would do new patient bonuses. If you schedule a new patient, you get $25. Same day service, I mentioned. If you reappoint somebody, you can do competitions. There's all different ways that you can do this. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on though. Obviously, we can answer questions later. And key number 5 is convenience. So lastly, making sure that your office is convenient, and convenient. I think that is the number one thing that patients are looking for today. Walking around planet Earth today, you can order everything from a house to a spouse in an hour. So coming to a dental practice and then being told, well, you have a broken tooth, come back in 2 weeks and we can do something about it, in my opinion, kind of breaks the paradigm of what patients are looking for. So what that means is having patients being able to, quickly follow up, pay their bill, add appointments to their calendar, confirm their appointments, communicate with you, do virtual consultations, all outside of your practice is very important. And I'm going to move on. Just put all of these together. An example of combining the key 5s, right? The 5 keys: communicate, clones, cameras, ka-ching, and convenience, with something simple like Curodont. If you're not aware of that, it's really just a way to deal with incipient caries. So if you have communication, you can say, hey, could you take a look at the bite wing for bedding in OP3? Are you okay with me doing Curodont? Because in many states, check your state, auxiliary team member can place this. So in place of doing an exam, you could actually have the dentist look at the radiograph. And then when you do that, the reason why, you're bringing that radiograph over, right? You can see that this would be appropriate for this procedure. And because you've calibrated with your team member and you have a clone, they can say to you, could you take a look at the radiograph and just verify that you're okay with me doing this? So then before you even come in the room, that procedure could be done. You can use the camera to show this to patients. Maybe mom's not even in the practice, but you can take a picture of the image and securely send it to mom, and communicate the need. And then when that hygienist or assistant does that procedure, they get incentivized to do that. Now, obviously, the Curodont procedure is going to cost and have a lot more than $5 in profit, but sharing that with the team member is going to be very motivating. And then, like I mentioned before, making it convenient so patients can pay that bill, or even if you want to send it to mom securely through the mobile application, so they can look at the image, verify that they want to have that procedure done. All of that is possible right in the patient's pocket. So I want to leave time for questions. So again, if you want the slides, exercise program, bonus information, go to brianlaskin.com/key